sparing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed. The bitterness of men fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place. There's a lot of people that would like to know what's going on. There's very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome, everybody, into Garden of Doom. We have a special guest with us who is a referral from our good friend, Dr. Reverend David Parry, who anybody who's been listening to the show for a while knows that he is the life force behind the Nephilim Anthropology Conference and has been the source of many a guest and part of the exponential growth of this show through the quality of guests that have come either directly or indirectly through knowing him. And he's been on the show several times himself. But without further ado, our guest today is Ashley Knibb. He hails from the UK, just north of London. He's a paranormal investigator, researcher, and author. How are you doing today, Ashley? And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, not bad. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. First of all, I want to, if anybody hears anything different in the audio, hopefully you won't, or hopefully it will sound better. I'm using a different platform, and hopefully it's going to work out great. My lovely producer, La Sicaria, is out of pocket for a little bit, doing La Sicaria type of things. So, Ashley, you've written at least 2 books that I see. You have a blog, and you are a self-identified paranormal investigator. I would love to know sort of what's the origin story. How does one, grow up and say, this is what I want to do, and how do you make that happen?
For me, I suppose it started probably when I was 11. I saw something odd in a window. Okay, let's rewind a little bit from that. I come from a family where we question things. I was always taught to question things, always taught to try and understand things and research things and get and understand myself. So when I, at 11, encountered a face in the window, I suppose is the best way to call it, in a manor house opposite where I used to live, it intrigued me because the manor house was empty. So there was no one in there, so I couldn't understand why there'd be someone in there. So that kind of drew me into the world of ghosts and paranormal, I suppose, and looking into that kind of thing, researching, reading. I didn't actually do an overnight investigation for many, many, many years later. And by that point, I'd read a hell of a lot and wrote notes and things about that as well, and get an understanding from that. But as soon as I went into doing an overnight investigation, I had a paranormal experience on that first overnight investigation, sort of overnight investigation, and I was hooked, basically. And from that point forward, I wanted to know more. So every time I got an answer, I had 10 more questions. And I just continuously and I still do now, I want to know more, not just about the paranormal, about what all that kind of, but why people are driven around it, why they understand about what their belief systems are around it, why one thing might happen. So it goes from all kinds of aspects, from people's beliefs in ghosts and spirits, spiritualism, to telepathy, telekinesis, supernormal abilities, all that kind of stuff. So the origin story, I mean, that's a quite brief kind of run, but the origin story is kind of like one experience amongst a lot of research and reading that I continue to do today. Keeps me sort of churning over, going from one question to 10 every time I answer that question.
Right. So most people around my age, and I'm middle-aged, I'm generous to some of the audience hearing that, but 54 is middle-aged. Most of our first introduction into the paranormal investigators, although we probably didn't realize it at the time, was the Scooby-Doo gang. Then in your formative years, Ghostbusters come up, and then shows, then cable gets bigger, and you find things like Mythbusters and Ghost Hunters and Paranormal Experiences and shows, and you see folks with different tools and things like that. So obviously recorders and videotapes and phones, cameras, and others have like different kinds of spectrum measurements. I mean, none of that looks cheap. I mean, well, some of it does, your phone or video cameras or whatever. But like all these different spectrum things, like how did you learn what's real, what's useful to you, what do you need? What do you need different tools for different types of investigations?
I suppose for me, I went through a full circle with that. So, like I said before, I actually went out on overnight investigations. I was reading and taking notes. So I had a notebook and a pen, and I was just scribbling things down. I went out on some investigations and met people that had all kinds of gadgets, EMF detectors, so K2 meters, and audio recorders. And back then, everyone had teams had CCTV systems and all that kind of stuff as well to capture evidence, as they called it. And I went through that whole cycle. So I brought the flight case and had all the bits and pieces in it, and had the millimeter and the digital voice recorders. And I think there's a box behind me somewhere that's got a CCTV system in it that's cost probably about £500, and that had like several cameras and audio and all that kind of stuff as well. So I went through the whole cycle of going through all through the buying the kit and having the gadgets, and then rolling it out quicker and quicker at every investigation, so we could document as much as possible on this stuff. Handheld cameras, both digital and video, obviously, as well, to carry around with you. And I've got the weirdest thing is I've got to a point now. I don't know whether it's because I'm getting middle aged. I am middle aged as well, so maybe I'll get to the point where I'm thinking, I don't really need all that kit. I've gone back to having like a notebook. I've got a digital recorder, but I don't use it for EVPs. I use it for capturing witness statements and things like that, because obviously you can't write as fast. I've got a notebook and a pen that I always carry with me and make notes in. I was at an investigation last night at the famous Jamaica Inn, and I was doing exactly that. I was writing notes every time I went through a vigil, but I take pictures using my phone of the location, because the cameras are brilliant on those now. So I don't rock up like the old days in a car and offload a ton of kit and then set it all up around the building. I kind of go with the flow, make notes and that kind of stuff now. So I've gone kind of full circle in my book and kind of reduced down what I use. So, but I did go through that whole tech phase, and it's expensive.
Yeah.
And at the same time as you've got all that tech as well, you're trying to hit as many locations as possible, and that's not cheap either. That's expensive in fuel to get there, and also in hiring the locations and all that kind of stuff as well. So it's not a cheap hobby, I suppose, is the best way to put it.
What is what's the conversion of a quid to US dollar?
Oh God.
Or what's 500? Around.
500 quid is expensive. It's a lot of money in my book. So I don't know what the conversion rate is, man, but it's usually not too far off. A dollar and a pound aren't too far off each other, as far as I understand.
Oh, a quid is a pound. It's just
a pound. A pound. Yeah. Pound sterling.
Okay, that's right. I didn't know pound, sterling, quid were all the same.
Oh, so yeah, that's
basically. You have to remember, I'm an ugly American. We don't know that much. I had to remember that you don't use the euro there. I'm not sure if that was a smart idea or not idea. I have no idea. Anyway, all right. So that's your origin story. You got into all of the technology, but actually for your methodology, you've decided that it's better, at least most of the time, to go the old-fashioned route. So how did people find you? Like, how did you get your first case, or how did you decide the first thing to proactively, affirmatively investigate?
So for me, like I said, from reading, I understood about locations that were supposed to be haunted. I joined paranormal event teams around the UK on their investigations. So basically, social media is the best place to find all those kind of things. So I went through that route. After a while of getting tired of going on events where you had 40 plus people, I wanted to shrink it down a little bit. So I started my own team, and I had a group of people that we went to various different locations. So I was contacting the locations and hiring them out myself, and then splitting the cost between the group. So I'd have a group of about 7 to 10 people, and we'd go to those locations and investigate those. And that was quite good because it was different from the events because it was hyped. Actual cases, they're minimal, come along few and far between. But today, I'm now a member of the Society for Psychical Research, and within that, they've got a spontaneous cases committee, and I'm on that committee, and we look at cases that come in via their website, and pick up cases from people, not just in the UK, but all around the world as well.
Well, that's great. Is it self-funded? Do people pay the group to do the investigations? How does that work?
The events companies, they pay them. When I had my own team, we split the cost between us, so a group of like-minded people. The SPR don't do public investigations; they pick up cases and stuff like that. But the SPR is funded by membership because it's a charity-based sort of system that's been running since 1882. So you pay a membership fee every year, and then you get from that a journal, like a scientific journal that they put out, and sometimes a magazine as well.
Right, and hopefully it's like an investment almost. If you like a realtor, you've got to invest in certain things, and then some of the houses are going to sell and some of them aren't, and some of the stories are going to pan out and some of them aren't, or even the ones that don't pan out, your own website says, that basically it makes it clear you're not there to establish everything, you're also there to debunk things as well. So either way, you can turn it into a work product. So, all right. I know that our time is a little bit limited today, so I want to jump right into what are the main categories of paranormal experience that you've encountered, just call it professionally, just to keep it simple. And then you can maybe take me through some of the best cases or most interesting cases that you've come across, and like sort of divide them up between different types of spirits, demons, whatnot, and don't let me forget to get to cryptozoology, because it's not the first subject, obviously, but I definitely want to hit that before we say goodbye.
Okay, well, I encountered probably most kinds of different types of paranormal, object movement, direct voice, EVPs, probably telepathy.
What does EVP stand for? In my world, EVP is executive vice president.
Electronic voice phenomena. So this is where you get your digital voice recorder. You're standing in a haunted house or a room in a haunted house, and then you try and engage with a spirit or ghost by asking direct questions, leaving a space in between to allow them to answer onto the device, and trying to capture a response within that. Within that sort of recording, and then you play the recording back, and you sometimes get something in between your questions that could be an answer, might not be an answer. You kind of have to defer that. TV shows, in my opinion, I have to put that in there, hype it up quite a lot, where you'll see they use EVP quite a lot because it's quite a reactive approach. So they can record something, play it back, and usually get like a kind of muffled sound. But then they often say, "Oh, it said this," and then they'll put what it said on the screen, which then obviously generates an understanding. People think that it says that, and through pareidolia. So it's quite an interesting one for EVP, but it's in my book it's quite tangible. It's too easy to think it could be one thing when it's not. So it's a tough one to go around. So
pareidolia is interesting because, for those who don't know, we've covered on the show, pareidolia is when the human eye turns something that's maybe an oblique image into something that they can identify. sort of the common examples. You look at the clouds and I see a turtle, or you see some lights in the woods and you think that they're eyes or whatever. And there's actually been studies that shows that there might have been some evolutionary advantage to seeing danger when there wasn't one, because the human being is not exactly built for fighting, wild animals, and it was safer to see enemies, whether they were human enemies or animals or something else, boogeymen that for survival. So while there might have just been a ruffle, you might have just been seeing the reflection of raccoon eyes or deer or whatever. I'm not sure if deer reflect, but you translated that into a bear or an ape man or a demon or whatever. And that's interesting. I also wonder, is there an audible equivalent of the pareidolia concept? Is there something where you can? Okay, what's that word called? Is there a word for it?
I just call it audible pareidolia, because it just kind of follows the same kind of aspects. Because it's there may be a academic word if you like, but I've not come across anything different. But it's pretty much the same kind of thing like you just explained, except for there's a noise you hear and you can interpret it as something else from what you can hear. I mean, the best example of this is there's many songs out there that people hear different lyrics than other people, because of the way they interpret that form that comes through. And you get a lot of that in EVPs, because people are trying to interpret something that's not clearly audible. And then that's kind of where it comes from. And also as well, the biggest problem with that is when you do EVPs, for example, in an investigation kind of scenario, if someone says that, like for example, they do a recording and they think they've heard something say "get out," then everybody hears "get out" from that point forward, because they can't wipe it from their mind. It's stuck. Right. It's stuck with that piece of audio. They think that's there, and that's where it comes into it without it being properly deduced. Where in a scientific background, you'd take the audio away from the situation, you'd give it to someone who had nothing to do with anything that was going on, and go, "Okay, what do you hear?" And then they'd tell you what they heard, and then you give it to another 20 odd people to try and get an understanding of what the consensus is of what was heard, or opposed to what everybody thinks is heard because someone said one word.
In the categories of things that you indicated that you investigate, you didn't mention UFOs or UAPs, and I'm sure that wasn't an unintentional omission, but do you find an overlap between ghost, apparition, spirit, demonic types of events and UFO reports?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I've not specifically investigated a UFO. I mean, I've read lots about UFOs. I mean, you read Kill's book on the Mothman prophecies, and there's UFOs, and there's poltergeist activity, there's ghostly kind of aspects as well, then cryptozoology. You then in contrast to that, you read Guy Lyon Playfair's book about the Enfield haunting. This house is haunted, and it does mention in there as well, back in the 70s, that there was a UFO frap over London at the same time as the Enfield haunting. So I have a strong belief, I suppose is the best way to put it, that there are commonalities between UFOs and that come into play with this kind of phenomena, if you like. And it could be as simple as that one person interprets it one way and another person interprets it a different way. So one person's UFO is another person's flying ghost spirit or Mothman sort of thing.
Right. And I'm certainly not going to ask you the big conclusion question yet. We'll build up to that maybe. All right. So what are some of the most intriguing cases you've seen? And if you want to divide them up between demonic, ghostly, other, that's fine. However you want to divide it in your mind. If you wanted to match your website or to follow your books in order or blogs, however you want to organize it, I have no preference.
I'll be honest, I'll probably be completely disorganised because I'm still faded from a little bit from last night, from being up till 3 a.m. doing an investigation. But in cases wise, I suppose historical cases that I've read about, the Enfield haunting is a really interesting one as a poltergeist case. Still to this day, there's aspects of that people don't. One side of the fence is it was faked completely, and the other side is like, well, no, it's completely real and all that kind of stuff. There's aspects of that filter into that. There's loads of cases in America that kind of filter into similar kind of aspects as well, like the Connecticut haunting and things like that. What other kind of cases? the Mothman prophecy does that first fascinates me because I think that's because that has such a wide crossing over of different varieties of phenomena that's happening at once. That's quite a fascinating case. As well as you've also got like conspiracy theories in there as well. So the whole you've got like the whole picture in one big case. That's brilliant. Locations and things that I've investigated personally don't often go to that kind of extreme. They're once in a million, almost once in 100 years that you get decent cases like that, which is unfortunate.
Well, you haven't been to West Virginia. You know where the Point Pleasant.
But yeah.
But actually, I mean, I'm sure that there is West Virginia, mining. I'm sure if you go into Cornwall and Wells, there's mining country and things. It's probably fairly similar in a lot of ways.
Well, I investigated a lead silver mine actually in Wales myself, and it was an old one, but I mean it was quite quiet to be fair, but it was interesting, but not paranormally interesting. So yeah. I mean, to be fair, I suppose I'm interested to see what happens this year because I've noticed that there's been an increase of cases that I can't actually talk about right now. But there feels like there's been a bigger interest and an increase in cases at the beginning of this year. So I think something's building, if you like, this year. So you might see some more coming out this year.
Now, I've heard a lot of that something's building, and in fairness, you hear this every few years, and depending on people's perspectives, that could be something really good or it can be something really bad. And then the day rolls around, and then it's and then days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, and months turn into years, and then right, nothing happens. The timetable gets reset. We misinterpreted the Mayan calendar or whatever it is, or with that wasn't the seventh sign, or that wasn't the real false idol. The false idol's still coming. Whatever it is. But I don't expect you to answer those giant questions of the day, or and I'm sure for everyone's doomsday or revelation, there's counter versions and things like that. What I'd love to do is stick to things that not stick to things, but focus on things that you actually experienced yourselves, your own investigations, on the ones that you actually felt compelled about. I mean, you've written a few books, so obviously you can clearly talk about those things because why not? You might move some books. What are the things that compelled you to write about that you felt, the world's going to want to read about this?
So the main book I've read, the other books I've done have been more like articles, I suppose. But the main book I wrote was Supernatural Synchronicity, that I co-authored with Sarah Chimicero, who's another paranormal blogger from Australia. Never met her, but we co-authored it across the wire, so to speak. And the concept of that basically was a paranormal back and forth, if you like. So we'd come up with subjects, talk about it in a chapter, and then she'd talk about it in her chapter as well, from a different perspective and how she perceived things. The book's very much about understanding what we think about the paranormal, but how we perceive it, and then throwing in lots of things. I mean, it covers a multitude of different aspects of the paranormal, from telepathy, psychokinesis, the pituitary gland, all kinds of different aspects of things, perception of the paranormal, how people can perceive things differently from other people, and how belief plays a part, how intention and attention can play a part in how what you experience in an investigation or in any kind of circumstance as well. So it's very much a back and forth kind of between the pair of us throughout the book. I like doing it because I like theorising on the paranormal more so sometimes than actually kind of getting into the standard format that everybody else kind of follows, because I think that there's a lot of aspects that are not being picked up, or they are being picked up but not highlighted enough. We kind of slip into the TV format, which is an overarching continuing kind of format that we need to get past and start theorising on things in order to move forward.
What is the methodology? What is the thing that you would like to see? Thing with a dopey word. What would you like to see focus on? What would you like to see more investigators adopt?
I see a lot of things in the academic field where they're looking into different aspects of testing aspects of psi and things like that, and I'd like to see that come into the field of the paranormal a little bit more, because I think ghost hunts and things like that, and even TV shows, they can be quite seem to follow the same reactive kind of format, where like I mentioned before about EVPs and stuff like that, and running around in the dark, and it seems a bit repetitive from my perspective. It's good entertainment, don't get me wrong, because it's the scary Scooby-Doo, as we mentioned earlier as well. The Scooby-Doo aspect of things is quite good entertainment. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's from a paranormal investigator's point of view, sometimes it's frustrating because it's like, well, why are you doing that? But in other aspects, I'd like to see a bit more kind of where they're expanding and looking at things from a different angle, trying a few more experiments and things like that. I mean, I think the only TV show or that I could probably mention that almost kind of started going down that route was the Hellier series that was done not so long ago, or two or three series I think it was. They seem to do a lot of experimentation, which is quite good. But other than that, you don't get very many TV shows that kind of angle out. There. Sorry?
Oh, there you were frozen for a second. You were saying the Hellier's series?
Yeah, so I think that's probably the only one of the series that I could probably think off the top of my head that's recently tried more experimentation than following the same pattern as other TV series.
Okay, what have you experienced yourself? What investigations have you found some validation for, and what category are they? Apparitions? Are they extra sensory powers, telekinesis with humans? Or something else. What is it? Demonic?
So I've done a lot of work with a location in the south of England, in Swanage, called the Royal Oak Pub, and they've done a lot of mediumship and trance mediumship work down there, and I followed a lot of how they've done things. We had seance work and all that kind of stuff. And working with them, so obviously their mindset was very spiritual about how things are working. But what I found really fascinating about that story was a few of them believed that they were it was like a past life. So the people that had been there before, in like 100 years previously, was their past life, and they were almost that person sort of thing, and that was coming through in their mediumship, in their trance mediumship. So it's quite interesting to kind of talk that, and that kind of took me away from what my usual comfort zone was, so to look more into the spiritual kind of aspect of things, which is a bit weird. And that fascinated me because I began looking at that from a point of view as well. Is it that it's a past life situation, or is there some kind of collective consciousness that's connecting them together through time and space and all that kind of stuff that brings that information through, and that builds it all together? Is the building itself, because it's related to the building as well, does the building itself have something that's doing that? You begin to ask the questions about where's the information coming from and how's it being built together, and that kind of that whole location is an ongoing kind of investigation that I've been doing that in, and that's quite a fascinating one, and that's something I've been investigating now for 10 years, and also writing a book about as well. So
okay, all right. When I said angelic, you sort of made a face, but if there's demons, there's probably also angels. And England is one of those countries sort of known for the fae folk, the fairies, the sprites, the whatever. Do you think that's a different category than demons or ghosts? Do you think that they're all the same thing, just interpreted different ways? Or do you think that they are different kinds of non-human beings that either share in our existence or visit from another dimension or another realm? I don't know a better way to put it.
I suppose there's been lots of stories and information and things that is out there. I've personally never experienced anything that makes me think that there's anything other than odd things that happen, I suppose is the best way to put it. I don't think I've not got any evidence to support that there's demons, fairies, angelics, or anything like that currently in my own experiences. So I have to go with the evidence and the information that I've got available to me as a person individually. So that's kind of how I total that up in a way, and then just provide an understanding from that point of view. I don't discount it because just because I haven't had the experience myself doesn't mean it hasn't happened or it doesn't exist. So I have to kind of build that knowledge up to understand what it's saying. I've not had that experience, so I don't have personal experience that it exists, but I don't discount it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. I mean, it's also a big question, and to think I'm going to get a easy answer is, you know, yeah, it's a long shot, but I have to take it. All right. So on your website, you have a bunch of interesting blog posts, including the 10 most haunted places in the UK. You have something called the Devil's Hour. So I want to start with the Devil's Hour. I mean, it might be self-explanatory, but not everyone has done a show called Garden of Doom for 3 years. So let's start with what is the Devil's Hour?
The Devil's Hour was a TV program, I believe, if I remember rightly. And it was in the UK here, and it was about, if I remember rightly, it was about a guy who lived his life, but every time he died, he then kind of reset, and then came back, and then he would remember his previous life existence, and then so when he lives his life, when he gets to the point where he would have died the previous time, he could change his life so he didn't die that time, if that makes sense, and he could influence other people as well in the same way. The problem was that it was almost like it felt a little bit like dimensional slips as well and all that kind of stuff. It was quite fascinating in as a story, but it captured these things capture my imagination sometimes, and then that gets me kind of thinking, and then I'll write a blog post about it, and obviously tip my hat to the source, which in this case was a TV show, and it's just you think about it, you think with everything else, you think, well, there's a possibility.
Right.
So it's built off the back of a TV show. So it's purely kind of a sort of a fictional background, but at the same time, it's like it does feed in as fiction does. It feeds from obviously experiences and things like that they've obviously pulled from, and on ideas and expanded on them massively and exaggerated on them as well.
On the site, though, it did say the Devil's Hour is sort of the a time when the veil is the thinnest. And
that's correct.
Maybe you could put a better definition on that than I just did.
Yeah, so there's also the other interpretation of the Devil's Hour being either I think is it the 3 a.m., which is the opposite to 3 p.m., which is the called the witching hour or the Devil's Hour, when the veil's shortest between the two worlds of the spirit world and obviously the living world and all that kind of stuff. And it's the opposite sort of to the time that you'd have mass and all that kind of stuff. So there's a kind of a religious aspect and really its relation to God and stuff. I'm not particularly brilliant on that stuff, I'll be honest.
Okay. All right. So on the list of the 10 most haunted places in the UK, I think one was Peterborough Museum. You earlier referenced the famous Jamaica House. The Jamaica House isn't famous to me. Of course, I'm in a different continent over a different ocean. So you know, if the Jamaica House is something supernatural associated with it, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, what are some of the top 10? And since you specifically noted the Peterborough Museum, what is the story, lore, reality existing within the Peterborough Museum?
So Peterborough Museum is always back in a few years back now, because I investigated that a couple of times a few years back. And it had a lot of reports of activity, audible voices, doors shutting by themselves, objects moving, all that kind of stuff. So we investigated the location, and on one occasion when we investigated the location, we actually got objects moving by themselves, or sorry, I'll rephrase that, an object moving by itself, not objects. And we captured that. And we've captured other bits and pieces. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, the main staircase in the Peterborough Museum, and noted that the light basically just almost like it drained out of the room, so it can make darker, and the atmosphere changed, and then from that point we seemed to have a lot more activity for a little while, and then it kind of drained off again. So it was quite an active location for a while. Oddly, usually in the paranormal they kind of refer to places when they get renovated, then the activity kicks off. For us, the Peterborough Museum got renovated, or at least changed around like they do with museums on a regular basis. They kind of done a refit of the museum, and it kind of flatlined and stopped being active. So it went the opposite way. So, but for a while it was quite the active location, and quite a few people said that it was quite active as well. You don't hear much about it now, but it was quite active back then.
What are some of the other sort of most haunted places in the UK, and you know, and if any of them are ones that might be recognizable to, you know, people, or, you know, around the world, you know, not just local. If not, just local is fine.
I mean, the ones that I've investigated, I can talk about. I mean, I mentioned the Royal Oak. That's quite. I think that's quite an active location. The Jamaica Inn that I visited last night. That was my first time visiting it. Actually, that's supposed to be quite active. I'll be honest. I didn't have much success there last night, but others in other groups did have some success. And there's a lot of stories and background and lore that goes around the Jamaica Inn to do with smugglers and all kinds of stories that date quite far back as well. So that's quite an interesting location, and sat on the moors in Cornwall and all that kind of stuff as well. So it's quite nice. Bobbin Jail is supposed to be quite. It's also in that direction, same location down near to the Jamaica Inn. That's supposed to be relatively quite haunted as well, and the Skirrid Inn as well, which is in South Wales. Where else I've been? Morecambe Winter Gardens Theatre up north in England. That's quite haunted as well. We picked up a few things there. That was when I went there. That was basically a derelict theatre. That was quite interesting. Where else have I been? Secunda Manor. That's an old manor house. That's quite interesting. That not more taps and raps and things like that as a haunted location. Langard Fort. Sorry. That's a huge fountain. That's quite good, quite haunted. And then you've got some massive other ones. I mean, Edinburgh's. I've never been, but Edinburgh's got some locations that are really haunted and stuff like that. And also you've got elements of in London as well that are quite haunted. But London locations are generally expensive beyond belief, so it's difficult to get into them.
What is that? The castle where they did all the execute? It's like Blackbridge, Black something. It's what. In London,
the Tower.
Yeah, they did a lot of executions there. It's called. Oh, I can't believe I can't remember.
The Tower of London.
Tower of London. Well, unless there's a different sort of slang name. But is there a particularly like haunted place that's historic due to the amount of executions that the different monarchs did in that particular location?
I mean, yeah, the tower's synonymous with being for executions and heads on spikes and stuff like that. Yeah. Can't think of another one off the top of my head. Another good castle is not Windsor. It's not one. Oh God, nope, just took my mind. I can't remember what it is. There is another one. There's actually quite a few to be fair around the UK. Lots of castles. Let's come back to it because my mind's gone blank. Sorry, I apologise.
Okay, that's fine. If it comes to you, you bring it up. Have you found any validation of what's largely called as a overarching term, the Fae folk?
The Fae folk, about fairies and stuff. No, simply. Okay. I haven't looked into it in detail, but it's fascinating. But no, I haven't found any supportive evidence on that. No.
I've met a few people. I mean, I'm not talking about through the show. Obviously, if I have a guest on the show about something, they're going to tell me that it's real and their reports and their experiences. But I've met a couple people in just by coincidence in regular life. Like there's a woman that lives near me who's from Iceland, and one of the first things she said to me was, the Fae folk, they're real, and it didn't come out. It wasn't just like that's what she tells everyone. It's because people I knew were going to Iceland. That came up. I was saying, they're going on that trip, and it was a running joke because they didn't bring me. So I would send them articles on Iceland and trolls every day so that they would get afraid of trolls. And I told her that story thinking it was ha ha ha, and she's like, that's all real. And then I met someone from Finland as well. Basically similar kind of thing. It came up in conversation because what else am I going to talk about other than I have a podcast? Other than that, I'm not particularly interesting, and then even when you talk about what it's about, and then when I meet people from other countries, I want to know, do they have any particular expertise in the folklore, the myths of their region? Because I love having people internationally and from different countries on the show. And she also said, well, the Fae folk are absolutely real, and neither one is committed to come on the show yet. But that may or may not be fine. I'm not sure if they'd be a good speaker or anything like that either. Anyway, enough about that. Let's go to cryptozoology, which is, in addition to pareidolia, one of my favorite words out there. I love the word. I love when I learn the word. So, what has your experience and your investigations related to cryptozoology been? What have they found?
I mean, most of my experience with that has been research based, because obviously, again, these are aspects. I mean, obviously the most prominent ones are like Mothman and Bigfoot are ones that everyone knows. Sure. You've got other aspects, I suppose, like fae people or fairy people would come under cryptozoology as well. But I mean, it's not an easy one to investigate unless you do go out into the wilds after going for Bigfoot. So a lot of it's been reading, to be fair. I just find it fascinating because my mum, growing up, my mum's sort of quite into biology and the environment and stuff like that. So she would kind of like bestow upon us, if you like, the realisms of the world and the environment and stuff like that. So a good example being the Loch Ness monster. My mum would always tell me it could not exist because the environment itself, the ecosystem there, wouldn't be able to support an animal that size living in that kind of environment. So it's not possible. And it's like, well, how would it be possible then? And it kind of like, so I kind of like asking the question about what would make that possible. And obviously you get the almost like the conspiracy theories of there's a tunnel that goes from the loch out to the ocean and that kind of stuff, and that's how it's possible. But then it's like, well, why does it come every now and then? It's like, so you get, but there's why one? There's got to be more. So you can't sustain a whole community of those kind of animals without there being more than that. So it kind of like they're kind of like a ghost in itself. Mm-hmm. And I think I've read something actually once before about Bigfoot as well, where people almost got to a belief point where rather than it being a physical animal that you just haven't managed to see properly, maybe it was some kind of spirit animal or some kind of spirit that appeared and people saw it like that. And I thought that's quite interesting, because again we slip back into this aspect that we were talking about earlier about the UFO fraps at the same time as poltergeist cases and all that kind of stuff, where you get people having different understandings and beliefs that then gives them a different perception about what they're seeing. So one man's ghost is another man's Bigfoot, or is another person's alien, or a person's goblin, or another person's fairy. And just because their belief system or something has a different angle, it gives them a different kind of thing they see. I mean, that for me, that puts me in a situation where I go, okay, so all these things that people are witnessing or seeing, are they seeing them in their head? or are they witnessing something physically in front of them? Or are they witnessing something that's not quite in this dimension or reality and is in a different one, and they just have the ability to kind of see beyond that? And it's kind of like, my imagination and thought processes go a little bit way out there sometimes, and it's like, wow.
No,
then you look into these kind of things.
Because I find that very interesting, that basically what you are hypothesizing is that it's possible that the Loch Ness monster is sort of like the, reptilian amphibious equivalent of like the Flying Dutchman. It's instead of a ghost ship, it's a ghost animal. And I've heard that about Bigfoots. Bigfoots have turned from ape men into a noble creature, very smart, outsmarted us, is peaceful, doesn't want to be with us. To they're from other dimensions, and they have super technology, and basically they're like from Wakanda. They live in an area that we can't see because they have it shielded. Everything. They've gone from basically being more human gorillas to superhumans. But as we were talking, and I promise you this is true, I'd never thought about this before, but, ghosts are basically our ancestors. And I was thinking that, one of the things I hate about a lot of shows like True Blood was that, they're in this little town, and all of a sudden it turns out that, like, everybody's supernatural. And the whole charm of it in the beginning is that, you're in this little town, and there's a vampire there. And then it turns out, like, 40 miles away in another town, there's like another little colony of vampires. And okay, give me one werewolf, give me one wolf. But it's like everyone in this town of like 2,000 people is supernatural. I hate that. But when it comes to ghosts, I mean, ghosts are our departed, ancestors of the people. And, humans have been around in Homo sapien form for 300,000 years to 1 million years, depending. And our ancestors, depending on how far you want to go back, are millions of years, but at least 7 million years since our ancestor and the chimpanzee's ancestor split off. Where am I going with this? That once they became some level of other sentience where they could have some sort of spirit. Like, couldn't it be possible that the ghosts are Australopithecine, that they are Homo habilis, that they are Erectus, that they are, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Denisovans, the Homo floresiensis, that people are seeing ghosts of not just Homo sapiens, but everything in the hominid chain for whatever reason, and so that you're seeing different shapes, forms, ethnicities, if that's even the right word for the, but characteristics and traits, so you might see a ghostly Bigfoot that is, with white fur because it was in the, the Arctic or in the Himalayas, whereas in South America you may see one more in jungle colors, like the orangutan color or whatever, and here in the U.S. you might see more your browns and blacks, like your, like bear colors. Do you think there might be anything to that? The spirits of sort of not just our human sapien ancestors, but everything in the human chain going back, who knows how far? If you take into consideration that if you take ghosts to exist, then I think you have to accept that, because one thing that always troubled me with the whole ghost thing is people would always see, mostly, not always, there's some exceptions, but mostly people would see ghosts that kind of went back to like Victorian times and forward to our time, and that was about it. You didn't seem to get much before that. There's a few cases where people have seen a legion of Romans and things like that, but these always seem to be, the ghosts that they see always seem to be people that they can identify quite easily, things that have gone through schooling and all that kind of stuff. So Romans is a big thing in this country where you learn about what kind of aspect of things. Victorian is an area that you learn about quite a lot as well, so you can identify that area. And obviously up beyond that, up to modern times, we all understand that kind of aspect of things, so we can identify that. But like you said, we can't identify going much further back than that. So it's sort of like caveman kind of situations easily. So when we see something like that, rather than go, oh, it's a ghost, you immediately flip to, oh, it's some kind of animal that I haven't been identified before, and all of a sudden you've got a Bigfoot. Yeah, so I think there's credibility to it, to be fair. It's a possible route, to be fair. Especially when you think how elusive these animals are. Right. If you have a ghost of a Australopithecus robustus or whatever, which I'm not sure if that's a real thing or not, maybe that appears to someone, as a troll or an ogre somewhere, or or a Bigfoot, depending on where you are, what it appears to you, or if you have a Homo floresiensis, which are called the Hobbit people, maybe it appears as a hobbit, or a gnome, or a dwarf, or an elf, or wherever you are. I don't know. It's just something that's been bouncing around my head. Actually, it came up while you were talking. I don't think I've ever had that thought before, but it strikes me, ghosts usually have unfinished business, either with people or a place. That's sort of the typical ghost story. I don't know if that's the reality of ghosts. I don't know that we've established the reality of ghosts, and we don't have to here. I don't think it's not possible. But but if that's the case, why wouldn't everything that had some consciousness, sentience, it doesn't just have to be related to primates. It could, there could be dogs, wolves, cats, bears, and they have trauma too. I mean, we if they suffered a ignominious death, or the bisons were fooled into going down going over the cliff, and they have some memory of that you may get the ghost herds, the white buffalo. I don't know. I probably should shut up about this, because this could be my theory. This could be a thing that puts me on the map. But whatever. Maybe the show is this. Anyway, this is my idea. This show's protected by copyright, so everyone knows this is my theory, and I claim it as I haven't heard it from anyone else, so I claim it as original. Anyway, you've actually seemed to have absorbed it and said maybe, which is good enough for me. Tell us your best, favorite, scariest, most directly experienced war tale. My scariest experience. What's investigating or something? One of your investigations where you saw something and said, "Whoa." Okay, it's been a few. Yeah, I suppose I've seen an apparition walk past the door. It wasn't really a scary moment, because rather than going, "Oh my God, I'm scared," I tried to debunk
the situation, thought it was some kind of light bouncing off of something. So I spent 10 minutes trying to, rather than chasing it down the corridor and trying to find out more, I actually wasted my time trying to. So that's a kind of rubbish story, but it's an apparitional kind of story. So I saw that. I've encountered whilst at a location, I've encountered like a I don't know what you'd call it. You'd probably call it like a black mass or something in front of you, kind of thing, from like floor to ceiling kind of thing. But whilst other people seem to feel dread about this kind of thing, I was more along the lines of kind of like, this is interesting, and I've got this annoying thing where, because I'm looking for the paranormal and trying to find things rather than getting scared or running away or anything like that. I get quite focused on trying to figure out what it might be that I'm encountering, whether it's me who's overtired and experiencing or hallucinating or something like that because of the situation. I overthink things sometimes, but this was just a weird situation where there was a darkened point in the room that was there in front of me, and I couldn't really explain it, to be fair, during investigation. But I didn't feel anything dark or looming, that kind of aspect of scariness. The most interesting, I suppose, is trance mediumship, that I found quite interesting, to be fair, because I kind of evaluated a few people, and then having people almost change their entire personas and have different voices coming out of them and communicating was quite fascinating. I found that really fascinating, almost like this person that I'd spoken to earlier in the day and learned a lot about, to make sure that I could understand who they were. All of a sudden was a completely different person that was completely out of character for them, but yet they completely commanded the situation and everything like that, and then it was gone again. And it's like, so trance mediumship is something that I find quite fascinating, but I have to recognise that you have to be quite cautious about it due to the fact that not everyone is as honest about the situation as they should be, if that's the best way to put it, I think.
There are people who can be acting. I mean, you have people who are good actors.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
But, if you're in the situation, perhaps there's ways to tell. I mean, obviously in the movies and TV, the voice becomes something that's completely not human, with bass and echo and whatever, that somebody would have to go through Herculean efforts to fake. But in the real world, it may just be sort of a different personality type of shift, and if anyone ever watched Robin Williams, that people can do that. There are people who have that ability. So that's probably good words to heed. A healthy dose. I mean, a lot of scientists call themselves skeptics, and I think that there's a reason for it. That they, you should approach everything with a bit of skepticism, especially when you're in an industry, a world where the world's going to look at you with skepticism too. I think it's healthy that skepticism is part of your methodology. It lends some credibility to it. So you get your case leads through the organization. People send requests, I imagine, or do they send like supporting videos or documents, or are they just sort of pleas for help, or does it come in all shapes and sizes?
It comes in all shapes and sizes, and at the moment they come from. So I pick up cases through the Spontaneous Cases Committee within the Society for Psychical Research. From them, I get some through my website as well. I've got an active case that I'm working on at the moment that came through my website. So they do come in all shapes and sizes. They come from the initial ones, which are basically last week, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I had this experience, and they tell us about their experience, and then we reach out to them, talk to them about it, gather the information about that experience, and then document it, and then put it into the SPR archives. Or it's something that's actively happening there and then to them. So they're experiencing something, and it's continuous experiencing to them. So it's like some strange oddities are happening in their house, and they're not quite sure what's going on. So they've reached out for assistance to understand it most of the time. It's not really about it's causing them harm, and it's not really about them trying to eradicate it or anything like that. It's often about understanding. It's like, what is it that is happening? Why is this strange? Why are things moving around in my kitchen? Or why is the weird ghost hiding my cushions? That's really a very real case as well. Down to one guy that I spoke to in Canada, who he witnessed a guy cycle down a road and then just disappear because the guy that was cycling down the road was clearly an apparition. So, and then he reached out to us, and we documented that, and then put that into the archives, and then so anyone else can pick it up. So basically, it's just a case of getting that information and keeping track of it, and all that kind of stuff, and getting the facts rather than over exaggerating the situation.
The bicyclist, is that something that repeated itself? Is that why you were called in to investigate?
No, had once. Completely once. This guy was waiting for his son to come back from school on a bus because he goes to meet him from a location. Just stood there on the side of the road on his phone, looked up, saw a cyclist coming down the road, and like his phone beeped. He looked back down, then looked back up again within a split second, and the cyclist was gone. And there was nowhere. He sent me pictures of the road, the layout of the road. I even went on like Google Maps and zoomed into it and all that kind of stuff and looked at it. And it's like there was nowhere for the cyclist to go. It just like in a split second, it was completely gone. And the clothing the cyclist was wearing seemed a bit off and all that kind of stuff as well. You couldn't say what era or anything it came from, but it just didn't seem like something that someone would be wearing in the modern times.
Gotcha.
So.
Yeah, we have similar, you can call them ghost stories, you can call them urban legends. So I found most urban legends simply are just ghost stories, which I don't mean just in a pejorative, it's just that they're sort of synonymous. But, we've got the hitchhiker, the sort of, or the hitchhiker is one of them. Or the call on the house or the knock at the door of the babysitter. I mean, that's sort of similar to a, bicyclist that sort of a ghostly motorist. I mean, I know a bicycle doesn't have a motorcycle. I can't think of the proper word right now. Anyway, unimportant. I know that you had a hard stop, so I want you to take these last few minutes before you have to go to, one, if there's anything I should have asked you and didn't that you want to talk about, feel free. Not just let people know where they can find you, how they can support you, how they can purchase your books, and whatever it is that you would like to get out there into the universe.
So you can find me on the internet on my website, which is ashleynibb.com. On word, that's nice and easy to follow. I blog on there on a regular basis about cases, ideas, theories. Around the paranormal on a regular basis. My books are on there as well, the link to my books, so you can get to them from there. I'm on social media as well, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram as well, I think. I'm not an avid social media type person, but I do pop up every now and then to add to posts and stuff like that. I'm not on YouTube. I am on YouTube, but I'm not. I can't get into YouTube in the slightest. Too old, I think. But yeah, the website is probably the best place to find me because that's where you'll find any blogs or posts on there and links to other bits and pieces that I'm doing. Sometimes you can find me in the Haunted magazine as well. I think got an article coming out in the next issue of that as well.
All right, excellent. All right, folks, and you can find me on Twitter at IcarusFellMD. Garden of the Doom does have a Facebook page, not a group, but a page, but we can interact. And I try to put something on there, every few days, sometimes more than once a day, something interesting that fits within our parameters. And you can check out my other podcasts as well if you're interested. Garden Views is obviously on the same feed as Garden of Doom. So anyway, Ashley, thank you for that. And just before we go, how is it that you know Dr. Parry? And is it correct when someone is a doctor and a reverend that you go Dr. Reverend Parry as opposed to Reverend Doctor?
I met him a good few years ago now at the first UK paranormal convention. We were both talking at that, and we met there and started talking. And I think we just kind of hit it off because of the weird and wonderful ideas and stuff like that we both kind of like got into and talk about and stuff like that. So it's just a random friendship. Oddly, at the same time that we both met Brian Cano as well from Haunted Collector. So yeah.
I noticed on your website that you had something with Barry Fitzgerald, and Barry's been on this show. I think it's the same Barry Fitzgerald because it's a big world, in this world it's sort of a small world. So that was a fun little find there. And he was a wonderful guest. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for your time. As you said, you were up until 3 last night. I also was up very late, caught a 5-hour nap in between. Maybe you didn't have that advantage. So I thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us in Garden of Doom. And when you are ready to talk about some of the exciting things that you can't talk about yet because they're still in the works, maybe you'll come back and talk to us about them then.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks very much. Have a great day.
Cheers.
Cheers.